The palace of Velzora had survived 7 galactic wars, 3 imperial coups, and one very unfortunate incident involving a rogue diplomat and a pet creature that shall not be named. It had never, in all its 10,000 years of standing, experienced anything quite as catastrophic as this particular Tuesday morning. Grand Chamberlain Orix pressed all 4 of his hands against his forehead simultaneously. His eye stalks trembled. His voice, when it finally came out, was the kind of voice that a being uses when they are one bad sentence away from complete emotional collapse. She is gone. The word hung in the air like a funeral bell. Gone. The Empress's daughter. Gone. Princess Vira, the crown jewel of the Velzorian Empire, the child who had been guarded by 47 elite soldiers since the moment of her birth, the girl whose sneeze was considered a political event requiring documentation, gone. Admiral Threk, standing rigidly at the other end of the hall, cleared his throat. Define gone. I mean, she is not here, Admiral. She was here at the 5th morning bell. And she is not here at the 6th. That is the entire problem. That is the totality of the crisis we are currently experiencing. Orix was not a being built for emergencies. He was built for scheduling, for protocol, for making sure the Empress's tea arrived at exactly the right temperature and that visiting dignitaries bowed at the correct angle. He was absolutely, categorically not built for the moment when the most important child in the known galaxy simply vanished. The search began immediately. 47 guards fanned out across the palace. Surveillance feeds were reviewed. Every room, corridor, garden, and ceremonial chamber was swept twice. The Empress herself had not yet been informed, because informing the Empress that her daughter was missing was the kind of task that required a great deal of personal bravery, and currently, everyone in the palace was experiencing a severe shortage of that particular quality. It was Guard Captain Selo who found the first clue. She was standing outside Corridor 7, Section D, Subwing 9, which was a part of the palace that most staff quietly preferred to forget existed. It was the wing where they had housed the human. The human. Right. They had almost forgotten about him. His name was Darian Voss. He had arrived 3 weeks ago as part of a cultural exchange program that the Empress had agreed to, mostly because refusing would have caused a diplomatic incident with the Terran coalition, and the Empress already had enough of those. He was a researcher, apparently. A young one. He had been given comfortable quarters, 3 meals a day in whatever the humans called food, and a very firm list of places he was not allowed to go. Nobody had thought to put "Do not befriend the Imperial Princess" on that list, because it had seemed, at the time, like a completely unnecessary instruction. Selo pressed her ear against the door of the humans' quarters. She heard laughter. Small, bright laughter. The kind that belonged to a child who was having an unreasonably good time. She opened the door. The scene that greeted her was, by any measurable standard, not what she expected. Darian Voss was sitting cross-legged on the floor. He was a lanky creature, the humans always were, with that strange smooth skin and that single pair of eyes that somehow managed to convey more expression than most species achieved with 3. He was holding up what appeared to be a small folded piece of paper. It was shaped like a bird. A paper bird. It caught the light from the window as he moved it through the air, and it cast a tiny shadow across the floor. Princess Vira, 7 years old, heir to the Velzorian throne, future commander of the largest fleet in the known galaxy, was lying on her stomach on the rug, feet kicking in the air, watching that paper bird with the absolute focused delight of someone who had never seen anything more wonderful in her entire life. Again, she said, in Velzorian. Darian did not speak Velzorian. But he seemed to understand the tone perfectly well. He sent the paper bird gliding gently across the room. Vira shrieked with joy. She scrambled to her feet, chased it, caught it, and ran back to return it to him like they had been doing this for hours. They probably had. Selo stood in the doorway. She stared. She was a decorated military officer who had served in 2 conflicts and survived a boarding action that was still discussed at the academy. She had no idea what to do with this. She quietly backed out of the room. She walked back down corridor 7. She found Orix in the main hall, still pressing all 4 hands to his forehead. "I found her," Selo said. Orix's eye stalks shot upward. "Where? Is she safe? Is she hurt? Was there an incident? Do I need to alert the Empress? Do I need to alert the fleet?" Selo considered her words very carefully. "She is in the human's room," she said. "Playing." Silence. "Playing," Orix repeated. "With a paper bird." More silence. Orix slowly lowered all 4 hands. He looked at Selo with the expression of a being who had prepared himself for disaster and instead received something that was technically not a disaster but felt somehow worse because it made no sense at all. "A paper bird," he said quietly. He folded it himself. "From paper. She appears to find it captivating." Orix said nothing for a very long moment. Then he turned, walked to the nearest wall, and stood facing it in silence, which was his personal method of processing information that refused to fit into any existing category of his experience. The Empress was going to ask questions. That was certain. The Council was going to ask questions. The Security Review Board was going to produce a 17-volume report. There would be protocols rewritten, procedures revised, and no fewer than 3 emergency sessions convened to discuss how the most protected child in the galaxy had wandered down 9 corridors to sit on a human's rug and watch a folded piece of paper pretend to be a bird. And somewhere in Subwing 9, through a closed door, small footsteps were pattering across the floor, and a paper bird was catching the light again, and Princess Vira was laughing the way that children laugh when they have found something that feels like magic, small, simple, and entirely real. Orix finally turned back around. He straightened his ceremonial sash. He cleared his throat. "Tell no one," he said. Selo blinked. "Sir?" "Tell no one, until I have had time to think about how to phrase this in a way that does not result in the human being launched into the sun." He paused. "He is not being harmed, correct? She is not in danger? She looks like she has never been happier in her life." Orix made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a groan. "Of course she does." He began walking. "Of course she absolutely does." He stopped once, halfway down the corridor, and turned back. "What did you say it was called? The paper thing?" Selo thought for a moment. "I believe, in the human's language, they call it origami." Orix stared at her. He stared for a very long time. Then he turned around again and kept walking, because there was really nothing else to do. Somewhere behind them, through stone walls and sealed doors, a princess laughed again. And a paper bird flew. The problem with secrets inside a royal palace is that they have a very, very short shelf life. By the 7th morning bell, 3 junior guards knew. By the 8th, the head cook knew, because the head cook always knew everything. It was practically her superpower, and nobody had ever figured out how she did it. By the 9th bell, the information had traveled through the palace the way that water travels through cracks in old stone, quietly, persistently, and absolutely without permission. And by the 10th bell, the Empress knew. Her name was Velkara. Empress of the Velzorian throne, commander of the 7 fleets, sovereign of 14 star systems, and mother of one small 7-year-old girl who was currently, reportedly, still in the human's room, now attempting to learn how to fold paper herself with her 4 small fingers, which were not, anatomically speaking, designed for the task, but which were apparently trying very hard anyway. The Empress walked down Corridor 7, Section D, Subwing 9, at a pace that made every single guard along the route suddenly discover urgent reasons to look at the walls. Orix followed 3 steps behind her, mentally composing what he privately called his farewell to a comfortable life speech. Admiral Threk followed 2 steps behind Orix, arms locked behind his back, face set in the expression of a soldier who has accepted that whatever comes next is entirely beyond his control. The Empress stopped outside the door. She listened. From inside came the sound of Darian's voice, calm and unhurried, speaking in his own language. Then came Vira's voice, attempting to repeat sounds she had clearly never made before, getting them almost entirely wrong, and finding this extremely funny. Then came Darian's laughter, which was quiet and warm, the kind that came not from politeness but from genuine amusement. Then came Vira's laughter again, louder, more delighted, completely unaware that her mother, the most powerful being in 14 star systems, was standing on the other side of a door listening to her mispronounce human words with great enthusiasm. The Empress put her hand on the door. Orix closed all 4 of his eyes. She opened it. The scene had evolved since Selo's first discovery. Darian was now sitting with his back against the bed frame, and around him on the floor were approximately 40 paper creations of varying quality. Birds, mostly, but also what appeared to be a small boat, something that might have been a 4-legged animal of some kind, and one shape that defied classification entirely but which Vira had apparently decided was her favorite, because she was holding it in both hands with the careful reverence usually reserved for imperial artifacts. Vira looked up. She saw her mother. Her expression did the very specific calculation that children's expressions do in moments like this, moving rapidly through surprise, guilt, and the hopeful assessment of whether this situation was survivable. Then she held up the unclassifiable paper shape. "Look," she said, in Velzorian, with absolute confidence. Darian made it. Darian, to his credit, had already risen to his feet. He was doing something with his face that Velzorian biology did not have a name for, but which translated, approximately, to a being who is aware they may have committed an error but is not entirely sure how large that error is. He pressed one hand flat against his chest and inclined his head, which was the human gesture of respect he had apparently decided to use for all occasions that felt important. The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the floor full of paper creatures. Then she looked at her daughter, who was still holding up the unclassifiable shape with both hands, eye stalks wide, waiting. Nobody breathed. Orix was fairly certain he had temporarily forgotten how lungs worked. Even Threk, stone-faced veteran of 2 wars, had gone very still in the doorway. The Empress stepped into the room. She crossed the floor slowly, each step deliberate, and she crouched down in front of her daughter, which was not something Empresses typically did. Protocol had 17 separate opinions about it, but Protocol was apparently not invited to this particular moment. She took the paper shape from Vira's hands. She turned it over. She examined it from 3 angles. "What is it?" she asked, in Velzorian. Vira turned to Darian and repeated the question in her best attempt at his language, which was honestly impressive for a 7-year-old who had been studying it for approximately 4 hours. Darian looked at the shape. He tilted his head. He said something that sounded like 2 words. Vira turned back to her mother with complete authority. "He says he is not sure," she reported. "He says he was making a bird but it went somewhere else." The Empress stared at the shape. Then, very quietly, without fanfare, without announcement, and entirely without the knowledge of the 17 protocol officials who would have fainted at the sight of it, she smiled. It was a small smile. Brief. The kind that happens before you can stop it. But it was real, and Vira saw it, and Vira's entire face lit up like a star going nova, because there are certain victories that matter more than all the rest, and making your mother smile when she walked in looking like she was prepared to end a civilization was absolutely one of them. Darian, for his part, exhaled. The Empress rose. She turned to look at him directly, which was the kind of eye contact that beings across 14 systems had described as similar to being personally evaluated by a natural disaster. Darian held it. He did not look away. He stood there, quiet, steady, paper birds scattered around his feet, and he met her gaze with the calm of someone who had decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that panicking was not going to improve anything. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said, in careful, deliberate, accented but perfectly understandable Terran standard, "You will teach me this also." The room went so silent that Orix could hear his own heartbeats, all three of them. Darian blinked. Just once. Then the corner of his mouth moved upward. "Yes," he said. "Of course." Orix turned very slowly to look at Threk. Threk turned very slowly to look at Orix. They shared the gaze of two beings who have just witnessed something that is going to require a great deal of paperwork and will probably change the trajectory of interspecies relations for the next several centuries, but who cannot, at this precise moment, do anything about it at all. On the floor, Vira was already pulling fresh sheets of paper from the stack beside the bed. She placed one carefully in front of her mother's spot on the rug, smoothed it flat with both palms, and looked up expectantly. The Empress of 14 Star System sat down on a rug, cross-legged, next to her 7-year-old daughter, across from a human researcher with folded paper birds at his feet. Darian picked up a sheet. He held it up. He folded it once, slowly, cleanly, making sure they could both see. And he began. Outside in the corridor, Orix finally remembered how to breathe. He straightened his sash. He looked at the door. He thought about the 17-volume security report that was going to be written about this. He thought about the emergency council sessions. He thought about the protocol officials and their 17 opinions about empresses sitting on rugs. Then he thought about that paper bird, catching light from the window, casting its small shadow on the floor. He pulled the door gently shut. Some things, he had decided, did not need a report. Some things just needed a closed door, a quiet room, and a little more time. Friends, if you are enjoying our videos and want to watch new and exciting sci-fi and HFY stories every day, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Also, make sure to turn on the bell icon so you never miss any of our latest uploads. Like the video and share it with your friends as well, so our community can continue to grow and bring you even more amazing content.